I've always been the type of person who believed that setbacks were just temporary roadblocks. You know, those inspirational quotes about resilience and comeback stories? I lived by them. I genuinely thought that as long as you had determination and a dream, you could rebuild anything that crumbled around you. But there's something nobody tells you about rock bottom. It's not the financial devastation that destroys you. It's not losing your company, your investors, or even your life savings. It's the moment when the person you love most looks you dead in the eye and shatters every belief you had about yourself with a single sentence. This isn't just another entrepreneurship story about failure and comeback. This is about the day my wife told me something that cut so deep. It took years for me to understand that she was wrong about everything. And if you've ever felt like your worth as a human being was tied to your bank account or your achievements, you need to hear this story. Because what happened to me might just save you from making the same mistakes I did. My name is, well, let's just say I'm someone who learned the hard way that success and self-worth are two completely different things. 3 years ago, I was running a tech startup that I thought would change everything. Today, I'm sitting here, financially stable again, but more importantly, emotionally free from the toxic beliefs that almost destroyed me. And if you're someone who's struggling with defining your identity through your achievements, hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to share with you could change your entire perspective on what it means to be successful in life. The story begins in my early 20s, in a coffee shop downtown where I met the woman who would become my wife. Her name was Sarah, and she had this magnetic confidence that drew everyone toward her. She was ambitious, sharp, always talking about networking events and career advancement strategies. When I first saw her, she was having an animated discussion with her friends about some startup that had just secured series of funding. I was immediately attracted not just to her beauty, but to her drive. She seemed like the type of person who understood what it took to win in life. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours. I told her about my corporate job at a mid-level software company, how I spent my evenings coding personal projects, dreaming about building something that mattered. She listened intently, asked smart questions, and when I mentioned my idea for a project management platform specifically designed for creative agencies, her eyes lit up. "That's brilliant," she said, leaning forward. "You know what the problem is with most people? They have ideas but never execute. But you have that entrepreneurial spirit. I can see it." Those words felt like oxygen to my lungs. Here was this incredible woman who saw potential in me that I wasn't even sure existed. We started dating immediately, and those early months felt like a masterclass in mutual ambition. She worked in marketing for a high-end consulting firm, pulling in decent money and always dressed impeccably. Her apartment was spotless, decorated with expensive furniture and art pieces she'd collected over the years. Meanwhile, I was living in a studio apartment with furniture from Craigslist and a kitchen that barely functioned. But Sarah never made me feel inferior about the disparity. Instead, she'd say things like, "This is just temporary for you. I can tell you're going to be huge someday. You have that hunger that most people lack." She'd come over to my tiny apartment, and we'd spend hours talking about business strategies, market opportunities, and the future we were going to build together. She'd bring takeout from expensive restaurants and insist on paying, saying, "Consider this an investment in our future CEO." She was supportive in ways I'd never experienced before. When I showed her my prototype for the project management platform, she spent an entire weekend helping me refine the user interface, suggesting changes that actually made sense. "You need to quit your job," she told me one evening as we sat on my second-hand couch. "This is your moment, but you have to go all in. Half measures get half results." The pressure to take that leap was enormous, but it wasn't coming from her directly. It was coming from this version of myself that she seemed to believe in so deeply. She talked about me to her friends like I was already successful, introducing me at parties as my boyfriend who's launching a tech startup. She'd post photos of us together with captions like "power couple in the making" and "investing in dreams with a man who's going to change the industry." Her confidence in me was intoxicating, But looking back, I realize it was also conditional in ways I couldn't see at the time. The decision to leave my stable job came after one particularly memorable evening. We were at dinner with one of her colleagues who had just landed a promotion at a Fortune 500 company. The whole conversation revolved around salary bumps, stock options, and career trajectories. I felt invisible at that table, contributing nothing to discussions about six-figure bonuses and executive retreats. On the drive home, Sarah was quiet until she finally said, "You know what separates successful people from everyone else? They're willing to bet on themselves when no one else will. That woman tonight, she'll never build anything meaningful because she's playing it safe. But you have the chance to build something extraordinary." That night, I drafted my resignation letter. Leaving my job felt like jumping out of an airplane without checking if the parachute would open. The first few months were pure adrenaline and terror wrapped together. I moved my development work to Sarah's apartment since she had faster internet and more space. She cleared out her dining room so I could set up a proper workspace with multiple monitors and a whiteboard for planning. Those early days were a beautiful kind of chaos. We'd wake up at 6 in the morning. She'd make coffee while I reviewed code from the night before. And then she'd head to her corporate job while I dove into building the platform. The lifestyle during those initial months was humbling, to say the least. We ate a lot of instant noodles and grocery store sushi. Date nights became home-cooked meals and Netflix marathons instead of expensive restaurants and shows. Sarah seemed to embrace this phase with genuine enthusiasm. She'd come home from work and immediately ask about my progress, wanting to see every new feature I'd built, every potential client I'd contacted. "This is the exciting part," she'd say, curling up next to me on the couch. "Years from now, we'll tell people about how we survived on ramen and determination while building our empire." Our relationship during this period felt like a partnership in the truest sense. She'd use her marketing expertise to help me craft email pitches to potential clients. She designed the first version of our company logo using Photoshop tutorials she found on YouTube. When I got overwhelmed by the technical challenges, she'd order pizza and sit with me while I debugged code until 2 in the morning, bringing me coffee and asking thoughtful questions that sometimes helped me solve problems I'd been stuck on for hours. The first breakthrough came 5 months after I'd quit my job. A small creative agency agreed to pilot our platform for 3 months. The contract was only worth $5,000. But Sarah acted like we'd just signed a deal with Google. She insisted we celebrate with champagne, the first alcohol we'd purchased in months that wasn't beer from the corner store. That night, she posted a photo of us toasting with the caption, "When you believe in someone's vision, magic happens." So proud of my visionary. The comments poured in from her network, people congratulating us like we'd already made it big. But it wasn't just the external validation that felt good. It was seeing Sarah light up when she talked about our company. She started referring to herself as the co-founder's partner, networking with other entrepreneurs' wives and girlfriends. She'd come home from these meetups energized, full of stories about funding rounds and IPO plans. Jennifer's husband just raised $2 million for his fintech startup. She'd tell me, her eyes bright with possibility. His company is only 6 months older than ours. Can you imagine where we'll be in a year? Those conversations planted seeds that I didn't recognize as problematic at the time. Success, in Sarah's mind, had very specific markers: funding rounds, company valuations, lifestyle upgrades, and social recognition. She wasn't wrong that these things mattered for business growth, but they were becoming the primary lens through which she viewed our relationship and my worth as a partner. I was too caught up in the excitement of those early victories to notice how her love for me was becoming increasingly intertwined with my potential for success. The momentum continued building throughout that first year. We acquired 2 more pilot clients, then converted all 3 pilots into annual contracts. By month 8, I was generating enough revenue to pay myself a modest salary and start thinking about hiring additional developers. Sarah was instrumental in this growth, using her corporate network to introduce me to decision-makers at companies that needed project management solutions. Her belief in me during this phase felt unshakable. And it gave me confidence to pursue opportunities one would have been too intimidated to chase alone. The first real taste of what Sarah considered success came when I managed to secure $50,000 in angel funding from one of her former colleagues who had transitioned into venture capital. The day the wire transfer hit our business account, Sarah took the afternoon off work and met me at a high-end restaurant downtown. "This is just the beginning," she said, raising her glass of champagne. "Next round, we're talking hundreds of thousands, maybe millions." That night, she spent hours on her laptop, researching apartments in better neighborhoods and vacation destinations she wanted to visit once we really make it. The $50,000 allowed us to upgrade our lifestyle in ways that felt modest but significant. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a nicer part of town. I bought a proper desk and office chair instead of working from the kitchen table. Sarah replaced some of her older work clothes with pieces from more expensive brands. These changes felt earned and reasonable, but they also shifted our baseline expectations in ways that would become problematic later. More importantly, the funding round opened doors to a network of entrepreneurs and investors that Sarah found intoxicating. We started attending startup events, angel investor meetups, and tech conferences. Sarah thrived in these environments, networking with the spouses of successful founders and absorbing their lifestyles like a blueprint for our future. She'd come home from these events with stories about couples who'd sold their companies for tens of millions, who owned multiple homes and sent their kids to private schools. "That's going to be us," she'd say with complete certainty. "You have the technical skills. I have the business instincts. We're going to build something incredible together." During this phase, our conversations shifted in subtle but significant ways. Sarah started talking more about positioning ourselves in the startup ecosystem. She wanted us to be seen as a power couple, to be invited to the right events and connected with the right people. She encouraged me to speak at industry conferences, to write blog posts about our journey, to cultivate a personal brand that reflected our ambitions. "Perception is everything in this world," she'd tell me. "People invest in stories as much as they invest in products." The pressure to maintain appearances became a constant undercurrent in our relationship. Sarah wanted us to dress well at networking events, to live in a neighborhood that reflected our aspirations, to socialize with other ambitious couples. She wasn't wrong about the importance of networking and professional presentation, but I started to feel like I was performing a version of success rather than simply building a sustainable business. The company continued growing throughout our second year together. We secured additional funding, $200,000 in Series A, and I hired a small team of 3 developers and a part-time marketing coordinator. Sarah was thriving during this period, both in her own career and in her role as the founder's partner. She left her corporate job to start a consulting practice focused on helping startups with their go-to-market strategies. "Why should I help other people build their dreams when I can focus on ours?" she explained. Her consulting work was successful, and having 2 income streams made us feel financially secure for the first time since I'd left my corporate job. This was when Sarah started talking seriously about marriage. We'd been together for almost 3 years, and the combination of professional success and financial stability felt like the perfect foundation for the next chapter. "I want to build a life with you," she told me one evening as we walked through the neighborhood we'd moved to, pointing out houses we might want to buy someday. Not just a business, but a real partnership, something permanent. When I proposed 6 months later, it felt like the natural culmination of everything we'd built together. The wedding was beautiful, held at a vineyard outside the city with 150 guests. Sarah planned every detail meticulously, from the custom invitations to the photographer she'd researched for months. She wanted the day to reflect our story, 2 ambitious people building something meaningful together. Her speech at the reception talked about investing in love and dreams, and creating a legacy together. Looking at the photos now, I can see how happy we both were, but I can also see something I missed at the time: how much of our identity as a couple was tied to our trajectory rather than our foundation. Our first year of marriage coincided with the company hitting some significant milestones. We crossed 6 figures in annual revenue, expanded our client base to include several well-known creative agencies, and started getting attention from larger investors interested in our Series B potential. Sarah was instrumental in helping me navigate these opportunities, using her consulting experience to advise on strategy and her growing network to make key introductions. We felt like we were executing our plan perfectly. The lifestyle upgrades during this period felt like natural progressions rather than luxury purchases. We moved into a downtown loft with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows. Sarah redecorated with furniture from West Elm and art from local galleries. We started eating at restaurants where entrees cost $30 and wine bottles cost $60. We took weekend trips to Napa Valley and boutique hotels in Austin. These experiences felt earned, and Sarah documented them extensively on social media, building a narrative about our journey that attracted attention from other ambitious couples in our network. But somewhere during this period of external success, I started noticing changes in Sarah that made me uncomfortable. Her conversations increasingly revolved around wealth accumulation and social positioning. She'd come home from networking events talking about which couples were really making it and which ones were still struggling. She started comparing our progress to other entrepreneurs in our circle, tracking who had raised more money or achieved higher valuations. Marcus just sold his company for $12 million. She'd tell me with a mixture of admiration and competitiveness. His wife gets to quit her job and focus on whatever she wants. That's the kind of freedom I want us to have. The pressure to scale quickly intensified during our second year of marriage. Sarah wanted me to pursue larger funding rounds, to hire more aggressively, to target enterprise clients with bigger contracts. She wasn't wrong about the business logic behind these strategies, but her motivation seemed increasingly driven by lifestyle aspirations rather than sustainable growth. "We need to think bigger," she'd say during our weekly business discussions. "Everyone else is scaling faster than we are. If we don't keep up, we'll get left behind." I started working longer hours, pursuing opportunities that felt rushed and sometimes misaligned with our core competencies. The company grew quickly during this period, but the foundation felt less solid than it had during our earlier, more organic growth phase. Sarah encouraged this aggressive expansion, celebrating every new hire and contract like evidence that we were finally becoming the success story she'd always envisioned. The warning signs of what was coming started appearing about 3 years into our marriage. One of our largest clients, a creative agency that represented nearly 30% of our revenue, started expressing concerns about our platform's performance during peak usage periods. The rapid scaling had created technical debt that was becoming harder to manage, and our customer support was struggling to keep up with the demands of our expanded client base. I knew we needed to slow down and focus on strengthening our infrastructure, but Sarah pushed me to pursue new contracts instead of fixing existing problems. "Every successful company goes through growing pains," she'd tell me when I expressed concerns about our technical challenges. "The key is to scale through the problems, not retreat from them. Look at any major tech company. They all had periods where they had to choose between perfect execution and rapid growth. The ones that chose growth are the ones that survived." Her logic was seductive, and I wanted to believe that we could maintain our momentum while solving our operational issues simultaneously. The beginning of the end came when our largest client decided not to renew their annual contract. They cited reliability issues and poor customer support as their primary concerns. Losing 30% of our revenue overnight was devastating. But what made it worse was how exposed we were financially. The aggressive scaling had increased our monthly burn rate significantly, and we'd been counting on that contract renewal to maintain our cash flow while pursuing our Series B funding round. Hey, if this story is hitting close to home for you, do me a favor and smash that like button. I know it's just a simple click, but it helps more people find these stories. And trust me, what comes next might save someone from making the same mistakes I did. I called an emergency meeting with our investors to discuss bridge funding while we addressed our technical issues and rebuilt our revenue pipeline. The conversations were brutal. Our lead investor, who had been enthusiastic about our growth metrics just months earlier, was now focused entirely on our operational failures and client retention problems. You guys scaled too fast without building proper foundations. He told me during a particularly painful phone call. We're not comfortable putting more money into a company that can't retain its largest clients. The investor meetings stretched on for weeks, each one more discouraging than the last. I was spending 12-hour days trying to fix our technical infrastructure while simultaneously pitching potential new clients and managing our existing contracts. Sarah initially tried to be supportive, but I could see her growing frustrated with my stress levels and the uncertainty about our financial future. You're completely checked out, she'd tell me when I came home exhausted and distracted. I need you to be present in our marriage, not just buried in problems all the time. The truth was, I was drowning. The company that had felt so promising just months earlier was now consuming every ounce of my energy and attention. I was trying to manage technical failures, investor relations, client retention, and team morale simultaneously, and I wasn't doing any of it well. Sarah's frustration with my emotional unavailability was completely valid, but I felt trapped between saving our business and maintaining our relationship. Every conversation became an argument about priorities and attention. During this crisis period, Sarah started spending more time away from home. She'd go out for dinner with friends from her consulting network, attend networking events without me, and take weekend trips to visit college friends in other cities. When I asked her about these absences, she'd say she needed space to think and that being around my stress was affecting her own mental health. I can't be your therapist and your business partner, she told me during one particularly tense conversation. You need to figure out how to handle this crisis without dumping all your anxiety on me. Her response wasn't unreasonable, but it felt like abandonment at the moment when I needed support most. The woman who had encouraged me to take entrepreneurial risks and had celebrated every victory was now distancing herself from me during our first major failure. I started to understand that Sarah's support had been conditional on our upward trajectory, and now that we were facing real adversity, she didn't want to be part of the struggle. The final blow came when our second-largest client also decided to terminate their contract, citing the same reliability issues that had cost us our biggest account. Losing 60% of our revenue in the span of 2 months made it impossible to maintain our current team size or operational expenses. I had to make the decision I'd been dreading, laying off most of our employees and scaling back to a skeleton crew while we tried to rebuild. The day I laid off our team was one of the worst days of my professional life. These were people who had believed in our vision, who had left stable jobs to join our company, who had worked nights and weekends to help us grow. I had to look each of them in the eye and tell them that we could no longer afford their salaries, that the company they'd helped build was now fighting for survival. The guilt was overwhelming, compounded by the knowledge that my decisions about rapid scaling had contributed to this outcome. I came home that evening feeling completely defeated. Sarah was in the living room, working on her laptop and drinking a glass of wine. I sat down on the edge of our bed, still wearing the suit I'd worn to the office for what I thought might be the last time, and said the words that changed everything: I lost the company. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked up from her laptop, her expression unreadable. I was expecting shock, maybe sympathy, possibly even anger. What I got was something much worse: cold calculation. She closed her laptop slowly, set down her wine glass, and stared at me for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and detached. What exactly does that mean? I explained the situation as clearly as I could. The client losses, the investor rejections, the layoffs, the remaining runway that would last maybe 2 months if we cut every possible expense. I told her that we might be able to salvage something if we went back to being a 2-person operation, that maybe we could rebuild slowly and sustainably. I was looking for partnership, for the woman who had encouraged me to take risks to now help me figure out how to recover from those risks not working out. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was contempt. I didn't marry a loser, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. The words hit me like a physical blow. But she wasn't finished. Love doesn't pay bills, and respect doesn't come from failure. "You're not a real man without success." I tried to respond, to remind her of everything we'd built together, of the early days when she'd believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I wanted to talk about the market conditions, the lessons we'd learned, the possibility of starting over with better knowledge and more realistic expectations. But she cut me off with a dismissive wave of her hand. "I don't want to hear excuses. I want to hear solutions. And if you don't have any, then we don't have anything to talk about." That night, she packed a suitcase with enough clothes for a week and left to stay with her sister. "I need time to think about what I want from my life," she told me as she wheeled the suitcase toward the door. "And right now, this isn't it." She didn't slam the door or create any dramatic scene. She just left, quietly and efficiently, like she was checking out of a hotel that hadn't met her expectations. I sat alone in our loft, surrounded by the furniture and art we'd bought during our successful period, and replayed her words over and over. "You're not a real man without success." The sentence echoed in my mind like a gunshot, reverberating through every memory of our relationship and recontextualizing everything I thought I'd understood about our partnership. The weeks that followed were the darkest period of my adult life. Sarah stayed with her sister, communicating only through text messages about logistics and finances. She wanted to separate our assets immediately, to protect her consulting business from any potential liability related to my company's debts. The woman who had talked about building a legacy together was now focused entirely on preserving her individual financial security. I spent my days trying to salvage what was left of the business while dealing with the emotional devastation of my marriage falling apart. The combination of professional and personal failure was overwhelming. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on the work that needed to be done. Every task felt pointless when the larger narrative of my life was one of complete collapse. The friends who had celebrated our successes during the good times started avoiding my calls. The networking events and social circles that had welcomed us as a power couple were no longer accessible to a failed entrepreneur going through a divorce. I realized how much of our social life had been built around our image as successful people rather than genuine relationships that could weather adversity. Depression settled in like a fog that wouldn't lift. I'd wake up each morning hoping the previous day had been a nightmare, only to remember that my company was gone, my wife was gone, and I had to figure out how to rebuild my entire life from scratch. The loft that had once felt like a symbol of our achievement now felt like a mausoleum of my failures. During my lowest point, about a month after Sarah had left, I got a phone call from my college mentor, Professor Williams. He'd heard about the company's closure through mutual connections and wanted to check on me. "I know this feels like the end of the world," he told me during our conversation, "but I've seen a lot of talented people go through setbacks like this. The ones who recover are the ones who understand that failure doesn't define them. And the ones who don't recover are usually the ones who let other people's opinions become their own self-worth." His words didn't provide immediate relief, but they planted a seed that would eventually grow into something more substantial. He reminded me that I'd been a valuable person before I'd started the company, that my worth as a human being had never been dependent on my business success or my wife's approval. "She didn't define you when things were good," he said, "and she doesn't define you now that things are bad. Your failure doesn't define you either. What defines you is what you choose to do next." I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Martinez, who specialized in helping entrepreneurs deal with the psychological impact of business failure. Our early sessions were brutal, forcing me to confront not just the immediate crisis but the underlying beliefs that had made me so vulnerable to external validation. "Tell me about your sense of self-worth before you met Sarah," she asked during one session. I realized I couldn't remember having a clear sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to achievement or other people's approval. Through therapy, I began to understand how my relationship with Sarah had been built on a foundation of conditional love and mutual ambition rather than genuine acceptance and partnership. She had loved the version of me that was successful, driven, and trajectory-oriented. But when that version of me hit a major setback, she had no love left for the human being underneath the achievements. The process of rebuilding my sense of self was slow and often painful. I started freelancing to generate income, taking small web development projects that paid a fraction of what I'd been earning as a company founder. The work was humbling but also grounding. I was solving problems for clients, delivering value, and earning money through my skills rather than through fundraising or investor relations. For the first time in years, I felt like my work was directly connected to my contribution rather than to my potential. I moved out of the loft and into a modest one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I could actually afford. I sold most of the expensive furniture and art we'd accumulated during our successful period, keeping only the pieces that had genuine meaning rather than status value. The process of downsizing was liberating in ways I hadn't expected. Each possession I eliminated felt like shedding another layer of the identity I'd built around external validation. Sarah and I finalized our divorce 6 months after the company had closed. The proceedings were civil but cold, handled mostly through lawyers and financial advisors. She kept her consulting business and most of her individual assets. I kept the intellectual property from the failed company and the modest savings I'd managed to preserve. During our final meeting to sign the papers, she looked at me with something that might have been pity and said, "I hope you figure out what you want from your life." It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the statement of someone who had moved on completely. The first year after my divorce was a period of intense introspection and gradual healing. I kept working with Dr. Martinez, exploring the patterns of thinking that had made me so dependent on other people's approval. I started journaling daily, documenting my thoughts and feelings without censorship or judgment. I reconnected with family members I'd neglected during my years of pursuing success, rebuilding relationships that had been sidelined by my professional ambitions. I also started reading extensively about psychology, philosophy, and the nature of self-worth. I discovered authors like Brené Brown, who wrote about the difference between shame and guilt, and Viktor Frankl, who had found meaning in the midst of unimaginable adversity. These ideas helped me understand that my sense of identity had been built on shifting sand, external achievements, and other people's opinions, rather than on solid ground that could weather any storm. Slowly, I began to develop a new relationship with work and success. I started a small consulting practice, helping other entrepreneurs avoid the scaling mistakes I'd made. The work was meaningful because it was based on genuine expertise and hard-earned wisdom rather than on ambition and growth projections. I charged modest rates and worked with clients who appreciated practical guidance over visionary rhetoric. 2 years after my divorce, I met Rachel at a volunteer event for a local literacy program. She was a teacher who spent her weekends helping adults learn to read, and our first conversation was about the importance of education and community service. She didn't ask about my job or my financial situation. She didn't seem impressed or unimpressed by my entrepreneurial background. She was interested in who I was as a person, what I cared about, and how I treated other people. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, based on shared values and genuine compatibility rather than mutual ambition or lifestyle goals. Rachel earned a teacher's salary and lived in a small house she'd inherited from her grandmother. She drove a 10-year-old Toyota and bought her clothes at Target. But she was also the most content and self-possessed person I'd ever met. Her sense of worth came from her contribution to her students' lives and her connections with family and friends, not from external markers of success. When I told Rachel about my business failure and divorce, she listened with empathy but without drama. "That sounds really painful," she said simply. "But it also sounds like you learned a lot about yourself. Are you happy with who you're becoming?" The question caught me off guard because it assumed that I was becoming someone rather than just recovering from being someone else. Dating Rachel helped me understand what a healthy relationship looked like. She supported my work but wasn't invested in my financial success. She encouraged my goals but didn't tie her happiness to my achievements. When I had setbacks in my consulting practice, she offered emotional support without taking the problems personally. When I had victories, she celebrated with me without making the successes about us as a couple. 3 years after my divorce, I launched a new business, not a high-growth startup, but a sustainable consulting firm focused on helping small businesses with their technology needs. I had no investors, no employees, and no plans for rapid scaling. My goal was to build something stable and meaningful that could support the lifestyle I actually wanted rather than the lifestyle I thought I should want. The business grew slowly and organically. I worked with local businesses, charged fair rates, and focused on delivering exceptional value rather than pursuing exponential growth. My income was modest but sufficient, and more importantly, my work felt aligned with my values and skills. I wasn't trying to change the world or build a unicorn company. I was just trying to solve problems for people who needed help. Rachel and I moved in together after dating for 2 years. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, furnished it with a mixture of new purchases and hand-me-downs from family members. We cooked dinner together most nights, took walks in our neighborhood, and spent weekends working in the garden. Our life together was simple and peaceful in ways that my previous relationship had never been. I still think about Sarah's words sometimes, "You're not a real man without success." The sentence that once felt like a death sentence now feels like a revelation about her character rather than mine. I understand now that she was expressing her own insecurities and limitations rather than stating some universal truth about masculinity or worth. The irony is that I'm more successful now than I ever was during my startup days. But I measure success differently. I have a business that serves my life rather than consuming it. I have a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than shared ambition and social positioning. I have a sense of self-worth that comes from my character and choices rather than from my achievements or other people's approval. When people ask me about my entrepreneurial experience now, I tell them that my biggest failure taught me my most important lesson, that real success starts the moment you realize you are enough, even when the world tells you otherwise. My worth as a person was never tied to my company's valuation or my wife's approval. It was always tied to how I treated people, how I handled adversity, and how I chose to define myself when everything external fell away. If you've ever been told that your worth is tied to what you earn or achieve, I want you to know that's a lie. The people who love you for your potential will abandon you during your setbacks. The people who love you for who you are will support you through anything. Success without character is just wealth. But character without success is still nobility. I'm not telling you to avoid ambition or stop pursuing your dreams. I'm telling you to build those dreams on a foundation that can't be shaken by market conditions, investor opinions, or other people's approval. Because when everything else falls away, and at some point in your life, something will fall away, you need to know that you're still valuable, still worthy of love, and still capable of building something meaningful. The man I thought I was needed external validation to feel complete. The man I actually am has learned that completion comes from within. And that difference has made all the difference in the world.